Hey guys, my name is Mannequin and welcome back to Mastering EDM with FL Studio. So today's video we are going on to a different topic. For the most part we have been talking about production and mixing. Production is where you choose your synths, choose the melody, choose the chord progressions, choose your effects, choose your drum patterns, and choose all your samples and stuff like that, and really design the song. And then mixing is where you get those different designed elements that you put in your track and then get them to all blend together in a unified sense so that it sounds like a song and not just a collection of random instruments slapped together. So that's production and mixing. Today we're starting a series on mastering, and I just want to give you guys a little forewarning. After this video series on mastering here, what's going to happen is the videos aren't going to follow a series pattern anymore. It's just going to be sparse videos with a lot of extra tips, because for the most part I've taught you guys everything you need to know in terms of foundations of production and mixing. Everything from here on out will be a lot more about the finesse of it and getting a lot more artistic decisions made, and learning how to make decisions to get the right things that you're looking for. So that's what we're going to be doing after this series ends. But for now, let's get into mastering. So what is mastering? Mastering is one of the things that is often overlooked by people just getting started. And if it is not overlooked, typically it's something that is kind of seen with a little bit of fear. So this is an unmastered track. Basically, I had a whole arrangement and then I just bounced it down to a single audio file by going File, Export, Wave File, whatever name, doesn't matter. And then you change the wave bit depth to 24-bit integer. And that's what we're going to go with. So we want to have the wave format here, not MP3, OGG, or MID. So that's what you want to do. The other stuff down here doesn't matter all that much. Just leave it at the default. Tail, you can either choose to leave the remainder, cut the remainder, or wrap the remainder. This is probably a bad idea unless you know really what you're doing. My strongest suggestion is just click leave remainder. It's always good to have that extra tail at the end if you have like a reverb trailing out, and then have it instead of accidentally cutting off a bit of that reverb because, the DAW decides, oh, that's the end of it, and then it cuts off a bit of the reverb even though the reverb's not done trailing out. So I suggest leave remainder, and then once again we want full song and not pattern. So it's going to bounce down your whole track. Once again, I talked about this earlier on in our series, just a little refresher, and the fact that I want you to know for mastering you want to have 24-bit. Now you can go to 32, but it's a little bit overkill. So 24-bit is good enough. Bounce that down and then drop it into your DAW like this, and then you start to master. So that said, what is mastering? Because we see this track here, we know that it's been bounced down, but what do we really do from here? Now that's where this little example I made comes in. This is an example of a mastered track. Now there's some good things about it and some bad things about it, and I deliberately did that. Whoops, that's unmastered. Apologies. Mastered. Here we go. So you might notice something different about this. It looks completely different. So, this is our mastered version of the track. And if you listen to the first one, it sounds like this. And then if we listen to this other one, and once again, that's basically what mastering does. It gets your quiet, weak sound and makes it really loud and pumping. Now, I did say there are some bad things about this. This one's mastered a little bit too much. It was pushed a little too hard. And it's kind of good for demonstrational purposes, because one of the things you want to be careful about is over mastering a track and getting it to where you start to have some issues. And this will be very important to our setup video here, where I talk about how to set up and prepare for a master. So, so right here, listen to this area here. We got this quiet section. So it sounds rather nice. Now the problem is with this one, we have distortion. If you remember that from previous videos, I talked about digital clipping and that being unwanted distortion sometimes. So this is an example of that. Take a listen here. Sounds good now, but That rattling sort of sound that you're hearing is clipping. Once again, let's play it over here. You probably heard that really well, though. So that's what we're trying to avoid in our mastering here. So it's kind of nice that this has it in here. This is actually a secondary master that I did of this track. The other master that I did not have this, but this is good for demonstrational purposes. So not a perfect master by any means. In fact, it's probably mediocre at best. But it's to illustrate the purpose of mastering in general. It's supposed to bring up the loudness and give the track a little bit extra punch, and also kind of shape the sound a bit better. You might have noticed this one here kind of sounds rounder, whereas this one sounds a lot brighter. So that's some of the stuff that we'll be doing in mastering. So that said, there's some prep you need to do before you actually master. Now, one of the things I said here was you could just bounce this down and whoop-de-doo, you have it like this. But really, that's not where it starts. Where it starts is when you're mixing. When you're mixing, you want to make sure you have something called Headroom. And Headroom, I may have mentioned it before because it's very important to mixing and mastering, especially mastering. But what it is basically mathematical space to, work with your track. So for example, if you watch this meter here, and when I play this one, it's pretty much just going to be writing 0. That's because it's already been mastered. And that means, we don't want this to go above 0 ever, but we could let it go a little bit underneath 0 for the most part. We'll keep it at the 0 though. So the original track though, it has headroom. And that means that it has space between where it's hitting and the 0. So watch. It's way down here, and the 0 is way up here. So we have plenty of headroom to do things. And why does this matter? Well, if we take this track and we turn up the gain on it, so it's like that, and then we drop an EQ on top of it, like this. It starts to distort. So let's say we wanted to boost the bass, and it just starts doing this. Even if we do a more realistic bass boost, and it just starts to get this nasty distortion sound, then that's probably because we don't have headroom. So if I turn this track down, then you'll notice we're able to turn up the bass without getting that nasty distortion. So that's one of the things you need to make sure your track has, headroom. And I may have mentioned earlier that my master chain right now does not have the Fruity Limiter that is on by default. So if you start a new project, it will have Fruity Limiter. Take that off, please, whenever you start a mix, because this thing will lie to you. It will either make you think that you don't have headroom, or it will make you think you do have headroom. One of the two. So, but whatever it ends up being, it will be lying to you. Now, the reason is because if we actually have this on here and we play back this track, remember we said it was basically around here and it had a lot of headroom to go before 0. If we have the Fruity Limiter on, though, I'm going to make this a bit more realistic and remove that plugin and reset the volume level. And I don't believe this is actually, nope, this isn't set to the default settings, unfortunately. So it's going to be a little bit hard. Okay, there we go. But the default settings are kind of like this. It brings up the volume level a bit, and then it makes you think, oh, I'm basically hitting 0, so I don't really have much headroom in my track. If you pull that off, you'll either A, find that you have a lot of headroom, or B, you'll find out something that's a little bit more disturbing, and I'll show you right now. So if we go, once again, drop a Fruity Limiter on there, turn up the gain, and then we'll actually turn up the gain on this one as well, before the limiter, and then it does this. They're like, okay, it's hitting 0. If I pull this off, then I should be fine. Turn this off. But it's pretty much still hitting 0. So the reason this happens is because your limiter will be turning your track down for you. So it's going to make sure it doesn't ever go above 0, because that's what a limiter is supposed to do. And that means you won't ever know what your real volume level is at. It might be way underneath 0, it may be way above 0. Basically, you want to make sure it's way underneath. So pull that limiter off. Please do that. And then you will know how much headroom you have. And once again, I need to reset this to its default value. And then we have headroom. Now, once again, if you have a whole arrangement here with tons of tracks and you end up not having headroom, do not just turn down this volume slider. That is a terrible idea. Go through all your individual tracks. It will be tedious, but turn them all down individually, because otherwise you might clip at what's called the master bus, and then when you turn this down here, it won't look like it's clipping, but it's actually clipping. So please make sure that you turn down these ones individually instead of turning down the master one to try to give yourself headroom. So that's basically what you need to do to get headroom. And once you have your headroom, you are ready to go. There are two options for ways you could take this from here on out. You could bounce it down, like I said before, saving it as a single audio file, and then you could go and master everything. Or you could just stick the plugins on your master channel strip and then do one final bounce at the end. That is up to you. Personally, I tend to just put my plugins on the master channel strip because my computer can handle it. But if your computer is having trouble when you start to put plugins on here and start to master, chances are you need to just bounce down the whole project as an audio file and then master it separately, because putting things on the master channel strip can add to the processing requirements for the computer. So if you have a relatively weak computer, you'll probably start to get stuttering and crackling, which won't really help you be able to pick out if that's distortion or that's just your computer being slow. So that's, those are your two options there. Either way, you'll pretty much get the same sound. There are people that swear by one method or swear by another method. Some people say psychologically one method helps better than the other method, but realistically, it's all up to you. Just choose whatever you like. As I said, I personally just drop everything on my master channel strip, and that's, I believe, what a lot of other producers do. I think Martin Garrix does it for his draft masters, and some other artists out there. Although one thing I do want to mention though in this video, as well as I wrap this up, is mastering is actually something that you should eventually be giving to someone else to do. Now, some people complain and say, hey, you should never let a professional mix your track because then it's not your work, it's someone else's work. That's kind of true. You could go either way on that one. You could make arguments and fight about it all day. But what I want to tell you is mastering is something you should often have someone else do. Why? Well, you kind of need a second opinion. This is your last take on your track. It's your last chance to fix any small differences that you think may need to be fixed. And if you're the one doing it, you've kind of been sitting there mixing it for ages. So theoretically, it should be perfect in your eyes. And so that means, if you master it, there's only so much you could do. However, if you send this to someone else and have them master it, then they'll have a different perspective. They'll have a different take, and they'll really know what needs to be adjusted and fixed to make it sound like a professional track. And that said, there's one thing you want to keep in mind. Do not fix stuff in the master. If you notice a problem, immediately fix it in the mix. Do not try to fix it in the master because it'll just be problematic. However, if you are a mastering engineer or you are mastering for someone else, you may contact them and ask them to fix it in the mix, but otherwise it's kind of your job and they're kind of expecting you to take care of everything. So you need to do your best to fix it in the master if you can. Once again, if it's your own track, do not fix it in the master. Fix it in the mix, because if you try to fix it in your master, the problem is you are adjusting every other track in the song at the same time. So if one thing is standing out in an awkward way, then essentially if you fix it in the master, you're editing every single track simultaneously and EQing and compressing it simultaneously. So it's not going to be pretty. So that's basically it in terms of the setup that you need to have and the kind of expectations you need to have for mastering. Once again, you're basically going from something like this to something like this. Once again, this one is a bit, it's clipping a bit, so we'll talk about how to avoid that as we go into different techniques and tips for mastering. But for now, this is generally what you'll expect to hear on a lot of your tracks. If I go to somewhere like this, I don't know, for example. that part doesn't sound like it's clipping. And here's a comparison to the original. Once again, it's a lot weaker. So that's kind of what to expect from mastering. It basically just pulls up the volume level without causing clipping. And that is kind of our biggest goal here. See how we could turn things up without getting distortion. So that's mastering in a nutshell. That's the things you need to prepare for. Remember, rule of thumb is make sure you have plenty of headroom in your mix. And one of the ways you could do this is actually, here's a neat tip. I do this a lot whenever I'm starting projects. I will get my master channel strip here and turn the volume up. And what this does is if I make sure it never hits 0 now, when I'm just listening to this original track, this boost here fakes it so that, you know, let's say it's actually hit 0 around here. We'll try this. Okay, so that would tell me, ooh, I need to turn down those snare hits in my mix so that they're not clipping. So I bring it down so that they don't go over the 0. And then what happens is when I finish my track, I just go like this, boom, back to the default volume level, and suddenly you'll see, whoa, I have headroom. So that's a good suggestion for you guys there. Once again, do not do this in the Fruity limiter. If you want to just add a gain plugin and boost your master output, that is fine, because you're just turning up the relative volume level so that when you go to bounce it or you go to master it, you just turn that back down, boom, and you have tons of headroom, more than you thought. So generally speaking, good rule of thumb is keep about 8 dB of headroom. Some people say 6, some people say 12. I just say 8 because, somewhere in between. So that's up to you, but you do want some headroom. And then when you got that, you could either bounce it or you could just drop everything on your master channel strip. So anyway, that's basically it for this video of getting set up for mastering. Hopefully you got all that, and I will see you in the next video where we start to get a lot more into how you actually master using compression, EQ, and actually, interestingly enough, distortion. But for now, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.